In this corner, we have Ghouls N Ghosts, one of the first must-own arcade conversions for the Sega Genesis. In this other corner, we have Super Ghouls N Ghosts, the pumped-up sequel that helped to demonstrate the true power of the Super NES in the early days. These are two of the greatest side-scrolling action games of all time, as well as an important part in the Genesis vs. Super NES console war. But what did the critics say 35 years ago? Was it as back and forth as it is today, or was there a clear winner in the 16-bit showdown? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Video Games and Computer Entertainment, and more classic magazines that reviewed both of these arcade ports. Today we're going to see where the critics landed, and maybe settle this Ghouls N Ghosts debate once and for all in this spooky new episode of Magazine Matchup.
Genesis brings you the 16-bit arcade challenge with Ghostbusters. 16-bit thrills in Ghouls N Ghosts. And 16-bit arcade action with Forgotten Worlds. Gruesome ghosts, ferocious foes, battles of power, of magic and might. Ghouls N Ghosts, Ghostbusters, and Forgotten Worlds are for the Genesis system. Sega Genesis brings the arcade experience home. Game sold separately.
While the name Ghouls N Ghosts may not carry the same weight these days, it actually meant something back in 1989. This wasn't just another side-scrolling action game, but rather a sea change for the industry, giving developers the tools and power that they needed to recreate some of the biggest arcade games of the time. While I'm sure some might be able to nitpick the very minor differences between the arcade game and the Genesis port, the fact remains that it was a near-flawless rendition of a game that was barely a year old. This was the promise of the 16-bit generation, and boy, you certainly saw that in the reviews. When Electronic Gaming Monthly got their hands on it, they were in absolute shock, giving it an average score of 9 out of 10. Ed called it easily the best cartridge game ever made. Also, powerful, with audio that is second to none and animated backgrounds that add a great 3D effect. Other graphic surprises include rain, wind, fire, and more. Combined with extremely challenging play, Ghouls is a superior effort. They would then go on to name Ghouls N Ghosts the Game of the Year for 1989. Now, while the Super NES game may not have won as many awards, it was still an impressive game. Earning the same 9 out of 10 they gave the Genesis version, Martin called Super Ghouls N Ghosts awesome, awesome, awesome! As the Genesis game did for the system, the Super NES version is truly one of the most impressive carts to date. Everything from screen rotation to blizzard backgrounds to storms at sea are in this cart. It's a bit hard, but the challenge is welcome. While the Super NES sequel didn't have the same impact as the Genesis game, the two versions came away with the exact same score, which means that we're starting things off with a tie. Just in case you thought it was just Electronic Gaming Monthly gushing over the Ghouls N Ghosts series, it wasn't. Video Games and Computer Entertainment was also under Sir Arthur's spell. Given the Genesis game a 9 out of 10, they said that it didn't take long for Sega to produce a game that was worthy of the power of their new Genesis system. Ghouls N Ghosts is the most addictive and absorbing release for the Genesis to date. Even fans of the arcade version will be forced to admit that this is a near-perfect reproduction. It's one of the few totally satisfying video games that I've had the pleasure to play. Of course, Video Games and Computer Entertainment also loved the Super NES sequel, giving it the exact same 9 out of 10 score. After initially confusing Ghouls N Ghosts with the original Ghosts and Goblins, Zach complained that the action will sometimes slow down considerably for a few moments, usually when there are lots of enemies or objects on the screen. The slowdown phenomenon is more the fault of the Super NES hardware than the game, but it still bears mentioning. The graphics are outstandingly drawn, the best of any Super NES game I've seen so far. Several levels use the scaling and rotation feature of the Super NES to swivel the walls and expand the boss to massive proportions. Hats off to Capcom for a quality game that pushes the Super NES to new limits. So, despite the misgivings about the Super NES version, both games received the same exact score. Sorry guys, but we're just gonna have to look elsewhere to break this tie. If any magazine is gonna break a tie, it's gonna be Ace and their ridiculous 1,000 point scale. I mean, with that many numbers, what are the chances that these two games actually shared the same score? Thankfully, the odds must have been pretty high because that didn't happen. Giving the Genesis version a score of 895, they concluded, the sequel to Ghosts and Goblins has not long been in the arcade, but already the Mega Drive conversion is ready. It looks indistinguishable from the arcade original as you fight your way through 5 levels in a quest to rescue the princess. Over on the Super NES side, Super Ghouls N Ghosts received a better score and a better review. Giving it a score of 915, they explained that the initial disappointment gives way to sheer delight at the unbelievably huge range of fresh new challenges awaiting the jaded Ghouls and Ghosts player. The gameplay concept may be an old one, but it's the software equivalent of a hardy perennial. As long as it's done well, the game can't fail, and Capcom have done it very well indeed. Super Ghouls N Ghosts is tough but rarely frustrating and will keep you coming back again and again until it's been cracked. And even then, there's enjoyment to be had from returning and trying to do the whole thing a bit better. A classic! With only 20 points separating the two games, the Super NES sequel has finally taken the lead. Now at this point of the episode, you're probably wondering if there are any detractors. Sure, the Ghouls N Ghosts series was highly regarded by most of the press, but the extreme challenge and simplistic arcade action must have turned some gamers off, right? Well, that's how Tim Boone felt when he reviewed Super Ghouls N Ghosts for computer and video games. Never felt cold, lonesome, and left out? Me too. I just don't think that Super Ghouls N Ghosts is the best thing since Takeaway Vindaloo. Sure, the graphics are fantastic and the sound is unbelievable, but that's true of most Super Famicom games. It's the gameplay I simply don't get along with. It's old hat and, to be honest, almost boring. To me, Super Ghouls N Ghosts is a tired theme dressed up with the fabulous graphics and sound of a superb machine. In my view, this will probably be a dream come true to the ardent Ghouls N Ghosts fan. Otherwise, it's best to be a bit cautious before shelling out the dosh. CVG ended up giving the game a score of 89%. Ugh, given that review, it probably won't surprise you to learn that computer and video games like the Genesis version of Ghouls N Ghosts more. A lot more. They gave it a 96%, which was one of the highest scores they gave all year. The graphics are arcade perfect, right from the scrolling scenery to the nasty ghoulies and end-of-level demi-demons. But even the graphics are surpassed by the eerie pipe organ music and stunning sound effects. They're simply incredible. In the light of the first few Mega Drive releases, I had some doubts about whether it would be a serious competitor for the PC engine. But those doubts are now gone. Ghouls N Ghosts might cost over 40 quid. But since you're basically buying exactly the same game that's in the coin-op cabinet, I can't really call it expensive. So there we go, Ghouls N Ghosts is the clear winner in this matchup, once again tying things back up. Speaking of computer and video games, let's go ahead and check in with their sister magazine, Mean Machines. This is easily the most competitive matchup so far, with only 2 points separating the two games. Let's start with the Genesis version, which earned an impressive 92%. The graphics are wonderful and the sound is great. My only qualm with the game is its difficulty. It's very hard, and I think some people will have trouble with it. It's worth persevering, though, as they don't come much better than this. I particularly like the little touches that make the game so enjoyable, such as the array of weapons and the foes. Do yourself a favor and buy this game now! Yeah, 92% is certainly a high score, but could it be topped? You bet it can, because Mean Machines gave Super Ghouls N Ghosts a score of 94%. I was knocked out by this when I saw it in the States back in June. In its finished form, it's even better. The programmers have utilized many of the Super Famicom special features to produce some of the most stunning graphical effects yet seen in a console game. The sinking ship, the snowstorm, the erupting ground, the sea swell, amazing stuff. On the playability side, this is tough. Obviously not on the easy level, which takes a day or so to crack, but on the harder levels, where the going is difficult enough to challenge even the most skillful Ghouls and Ghosts experts. For the second time in as many months, Capcom has come up with a blisteringly hot Super Famicom game that you just have to buy. Oh, it was a nail biter, but Super Ghouls N Ghosts takes it. Once again, the Super NES has broken the tie and is up by 1. And with that, it's time to enter the lightning round, where we check in with some of the magazines published in a language that is not English. Our first stop is the German magazine Aktueller Softwaremarkt, or ASM if you're into the whole brevity thing. ASM ended up liking the Super NES game a bit more than what Sega produced, giving Super Ghouls N Ghosts a score of 10 out of 12, with the original Ghouls N Ghosts lagging behind with an 8.6 out of 12. That's basically the equivalent of 72% versus 83%, in case you were wondering. Once again, the Super NES takes it. You ended up seeing a similar divide over at the German magazine Video Games, who gave the Genesis version a lower than expected 78%, and the Super NES version a slightly better 84%. They were mostly put off by the extreme difficulty. And with the score of 6-3, the Super NES sequel takes it. Man, Super Ghouls N Ghosts really came alive in the lightning round, but even without those German magazines, Mean Machines would have sealed the win for the Super NES. Personally speaking, it's the Genesis version that had the bigger impact on me, but I'm biased, as you'll see when you watch this clip of me on GamePro TV in the early 1990s.
Up-to-the-minute tips and tactics for Lolo 2 on your Nintendo Entertainment System. And the Force will be with us as our Game Lab gonzos check out the new Star Wars action game card. We'll take a look at what's hot at the arcade with Who Shot Johnny Rock. All this and more on GamePro. So let's kick it. GamePro's back. Let's kick it.
Hello, I'm Silas Shaw from Aberdeen, Washington, and I have a great way to beat Lokai, the big boss in Ghouls N Ghosts, for the Sega Genesis. First, get the Psycho Cannon from Volcar. When you finally get to Lokai, jump on one of his feet. When he raises his leg, then you'll be able to fire repeatedly at his chin, even though his leg is moving up and down. I promise you'll beat him in a snap.
Good tip. And to show you our appreciation, we're going to be sending you your very own GamePro TV. Yeah.
Hey, that's right. And that's all the time they're letting us have this week. And besides, our game techs are fried.
That's right, bud.
Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we try to post new episodes of Magazine Matchup every month. Now, we haven't been super consistent this year, but we are up to episode 5 with the goal of getting another 1 or 2 out before the end of the year. Now, here's the question I have for you. Which is better, Ghouls N Ghosts or Super Ghouls N Ghosts? The magazines say super, but what about you? Let's see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back with another episode of the Review Crew later this week. capping off October. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,